Black and white photography, that is what we're talking about in this video, and we're going to be specifically looking at what are the key ingredients to making a good black and white image, what to include, what to avoid, and then we'll do a bit of an edit on an image here. Let's face it, when we talk about black and white photographs, I think all of us, whether you're a photographer or you're not, whether you shoot landscapes or portraits, there's something about a good black and white image that always just seems to demand respect. And I think all of us have that admiration for black and white images. They just have that real timeless feel. But of course, we do see our fair share of black and white photos which just don't quite hit the mark. So let's break it down in this video. We've got an image here that we're going to process, and hopefully by the end you're more confident and inspired to get out and do some black and white photography yourself. So I've pulled up an image here, and this one I've more or less processed it. Now I want to open up the Smart Object, jump back into Camera Raw, and the first thing I'm going to do is reset this edit, and we'll do the green reveal of what it looked like, because it's quite different to what we're looking at now. Bang, there we go. So this was shot on a day where obviously it was all about the atmosphere, the layering. I really liked the way this main mountain range just framed up in the valley. And there's a very soft light throughout the scene. Now, why did I decide to convert this to black and white? And why is it anyway that in my portfolio, black and white images maybe only make up 5 to 10%? Well, there's some very key ingredients which have to go into making an effective black and white image. And really, if I was going to simplify it for you for the sake of the lesson, it's all about tonal range, and I guess you could even simplify that further by saying contrast throughout the entire scene. And typically when we're shooting, say, a sunrise or sunset, we'll have a big tonal range, but we'll have those tones in very isolated parts of the image. We'll have incredibly bright skies and then generally quite dark subject matter in the landscape because things are backlit, typically, for example. When you look at this image here, we have a broad tonal range. If we look at the histogram, more or less everything is one big mid-tone. If I brighten up the exposure and pull things across, we have almost everything in this image. We've got blacks, or hardly any blacks, but we've got shadows, then we move into our mid-tones, and then we run on through to our highlights, and then our whites is down this far end. We have tonality all the way through. And when we look at the image itself, we're seeing that all throughout the landscape. We have light, dark, and then this really shows it here very well. Look on this contour on the tree line where we have the light hitting the trees. So in this frame, we have a huge range, and we don't have vast areas of one particular tone. We have all those tones spread out all the way through, and that is the key to making a good black and white image. And this type of scenario generally happens when the sun is higher in the sky, not necessarily around the sunrise or sunset, which is when typically us landscape photographers like to go out and shoot. This scene here, for example, was shot 2 hours after the sunrise. So when it comes to actually going out and creating a black and white photograph, that's one thing you need to consider. You have to really deconstruct how you might normally go out and shoot. Don't base everything around the golden hour necessarily and going out during that later light or the earlier morning light. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certainly scenarios where that can work, especially if you have side light and that side light is illuminating all different parts of your scene. But if you're working with a backlight or even a front light, you're just not going to have that tonality all the way through, that big tonal range spread constantly throughout the image. Another key component with black and white images, you've got to nail the composition. We can't use color now to direct the eye or maybe grab some attention. You really need to nail the comp. Now, if we do a black and white conversion on this one, simply generally what I would do is push the black and white button in that top right hand corner. That's been applied. Already you can see it does a pretty big result. But compositionally now, everything's just been reduced to the big obvious shapes and the tones. Now the main shapes that are standing out, I'll just leave this on red at the moment, but we have the big ridge on that right hand side. we have one balancing out things on the left, and then in the middle, the tipping point here with the big triangular peak. It's a composition that's as old as time, but it works. One area of this particular frame which I need to be cautious of is all this fog in this lower left corner is quite demanding because that tone is taking up a huge portion of the image. So in my processing, what I would be doing in this case is trying to keep this area a little darker, bring the contrast up, for example, just to quieten that section down so it's not taking away from our main subject matter and where I'm trying to lead the eye, which is back through to the mountain scene. What I look for on these days as well, sometimes we can say, oh, the light's bad, I'll do a black and white. No, that's definitely not what we want to do. You've got to have that light and that tonality all the way through. And even on an overcast day, this is when typically a landscape photographer might say, oh, I'll just do a black and white. Overcast skies, they can work, but we still want to have that tonal variance up there. See how in the sky now I've got dark and light and a beautiful gradient in between? That's exactly what you want. You want to have some clouds there and range of tones throughout the clouds. So then when you process them, look what we have up in that sky, for example. We have a nice contrast and that what we're calling the tonal range in the sky as well as the landscape. Perfect. That's generally what we're looking for. So I've got the balance here with the composition, now the processing. So what I'll do in this case, I'd brighten up the exposure initially, and then I need to, first and foremost, probably just pull the highlights down. So I just use a brush. If you haven't seen me process before, I just use the brush 90% of the time. And I have the feather, flow and density all at 100, so I can work really quick with the brush. So I've just ran that all along that bottom area, all down there, and then I increase the contrast. See how it's just breaking up how much of that white tone there is? That's a lot of whites, and then more variance, make it less distracting. I'll also do something similar in the sky. I might actually dehaze, which is going to adjust like a mid-tone contrast, the mid-darks, and I'll pull the blacks down. And you see what's happening now with that sky. Let's get that tonal range up there greater, heavier. So bring the blacks down. I could increase the contrast, even slightly pull the exposure down. Where I want to lead the eye is to the mountain, and we do have a side light coming across in this frame. We can see that light on the mountain, then of course, as we pointed out earlier, on the trees. So I'll keep that in mind when I process and work the light from left to right. So I'll brighten up this left area and pull that light across, and then shrink the brush down a little and just hit some of this mist and trees in the distance. A key consideration too is the atmospheric perspective, making sure that the darkest of darks I'll have down in the foreground, but then as we get off into the distance, it's already happening. You can see it naturally. There's no black anymore. It's a lot lighter. So I need to keep that in mind. And for that reason, I would also potentially make the shadows and blacks lighter in this area. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far, guys, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps the channel to grow and helps with the algorithm and all the stuff that we really don't want to think about. But if you are enjoying it, please just consider subscribing. Thumbs up and comments also really help. Now, back to this. Another key thing that I might do is some clarity in the foreground, which would just also break up some of this fog. And what I like about black and whites is you can work heavier handed than typically what you do in color, because you don't have to worry about colors getting too saturated and becoming too distracting. And we do bend reality a little bit more for sure when it comes to these scenes, you know, like darkening this sky right down. And yes, you know, it's going to be subjective, but I do enjoy that part of black and white where we can really lean into a little more of a ethereal type look in the photograph. Lastly, with that light coming in, one more time, bring the whites up. Now let me show you a little trick. So I'm just boosting that light one more time here. With the light on the summit, you know, I could just grab the brush and pump the whites and highlights up and hit that, which that honestly works pretty much fine anyway. But another thing you can do is use I don't do this too often, but I tried it recently. Select object and just use this to more or less hit that area of light Now it's stuck to that. And then what I'll do this with that brush is go down, or that selection, sorry. And now I'm just bringing that up, and you don't really have to worry about halos and the brush going outside the edge, for example. So not a bad way to do a more refined selection, but just go easy with refined selections, because the way light works in the landscape, it bleeds and spreads and, you know, goes across different areas. It's very rarely just on one specific spot. So if you are going to do that, just yeah, go easy on how much you're selecting things. Otherwise it will look digitized way too quickly. A little before and after then, if we want to do that, we can reset and then reapply. So you see how we're shaping the tones, and we started off with a broad range of tones, but not many brights, not much actual contrast. And now look at the histogram. So really introduced a lot more light. So that's a general direction on how I would work on an image like that. So let's summarize. Black and white photography, it's got to be the right light. We have to have good light that is spread throughout the landscape. Typically, we don't want vast areas of dark and light, like a high contrast scene in isolated zones. We want the contrast, but we want it spread all the way through, breaking everything up. So to get that light, that tonal range spread throughout, you generally will have the sun higher in the sky. So if you're going to maybe attempt some black and white photography, do it well and truly before your sunset golden hour shooting, or wait around after sunrise and watch how the light interacts with the landscape. Try to avoid big open negative spaces. They just become incredibly distracting once you lose the color. So what I did with this lower left corner here, it wasn't too bad, but I used the processing to try and get a bit more tonal range. Same as the sky. Thankfully the clouds had that tonal range in them, so I could really pull that out later on. But if it was crystal clear, it would just be a huge void, really hard to work with. So think about the tonality in the landscape and in the sky, and make sure your composition is working effectively. And something I'm always considering, I never think of rule of thirds, I always think about balance, just like a seesaw. And I'm making sure that my main subject is what you'd call the fulcrum point, the tipping point. That's the main subject. And then I'm balancing objects in the landscape around that subject matter, that fulcrum point, and making sure that I've got the right balance. And this image here is just a real classic mountain valley perspective, but you can see in full effect how that balancing and that whole concept really comes together. Really enjoyed just sharing this one with you. I hope you got something out of it. I do have a longer masterclass on black and white photography. The link is below to that. The raw files are included, and we just go in more depth and have lots of different lessons. Otherwise, guys, I hope I see you on another YouTube video shortly. Thank you so much for your support.